Welcome to the second class on perspective. We're going to start perspective 2 where we left off. So we are going to jump right into 3-point perspective first, because this is going to be the one that is, well, next in line. We've seen no point perspective 1 and 2, and so the third one makes sense to cover next. And also it happens to be one that you will probably use most of the time. So it's a type of drawing perspective that is fairly accurate, generally speaking not too distorted, so it looks very similar to what you would see with your own eyes. For that reason, it's something that you are likely to use quite extensively if you dabble in perspective. Next, we are going to tackle 4-point perspective, and this becomes a little bit more challenging, but it's an excellent way to draw in perspective when it comes to drawing characters. It allows for some really dynamic images or illustrations, and even though it is a significant bump in complexity as compared to the other types of perspective that we've seen thus far, it is definitely worth it, and it's something that you should definitely learn and understand. And then finally, we're going to take a look at 5-point perspective, which is quite rare, but it's also important to look at it and see what it's all about. And throughout this class, there are going to be a number of different tips and tricks to do certain things in perspective that might otherwise be a little bit tricky to figure out. Lastly, I'll tackle the 2 exercises for this class. The first one is going to be a scene using 3-point perspective, and the second one is going to be drawing a character in 4-point perspective. So with this, we should get a pretty good overview of the majority of cases that you'll encounter, and you should have, after this class, pretty much all the tools that you need to create some pretty cool art. We have a lot to look at, so let's get started. Alright, so the next type of perspective that we are going to take a look at is the one that is probably the most important, is the one that represents reality in the most accurate way, and it is going to be 3-point perspective. So as the name suggests, 3-point perspective is, it's called this way because it uses 3 vanishing points instead of 2. So we've had a look at 1-point and 2-point perspective. Now the next one is going to be 3 points. So just like what we've seen so far, the first 2 vanishing points are going to be on the horizon. So that is not going to change. So vanishing point 1 and 2 will always be on the horizon, and whatever is going to be drawn is going to be within those 2, so in between. And the other vanishing point is going to be either above or below the vanishing the horizon line. So it's not going to be on it because that wouldn't work. So what we're trying to create here initially is a triangle. And then to achieve this, so I'm going to go ahead and place a vanishing point. Let's do it below for the first example. So we'll go right below right here. So for the best results, it's always best to place this third vanishing point kind of in the center. So you take the distance between the 2 initial vanishing points, number 1 and 2, and then right down the middle here, this is where the third one is going to land, somewhere below the horizon line. And again, for the best results, you'll want to have your vanishing points kind of outside of your canvas. So let's say you're going to be drawing a scene. You'll want maybe to frame it like this, where all of your vanishing points are going to be outside of your canvas. So your drawing is going to be in here, and you're not actually going to be able to see the vanishing points in your piece. If you don't do that, so if you include the vanishing points in your image, then you might be getting some really strange deformations that might not look that great. So the main problem with this won't be really within this triangle here that gets created when we add a third vanishing point. It's going to be in the areas that are outside right here. So this area right here, things will get really stretched in those areas. And this is kind of what you're trying to avoid if you get a closer shot instead. So something like that. As you can see now, the areas that are outside of the triangle are only these corners here. So this is not going to really affect much, and will give us much nicer results when in a canvas like this. But before I go into and talk about the triangle here and all those things, let's go ahead and do a simple example of what adding a third vanishing point is going to create. So I'm going to add 2 of them. So those are going to be the same ones, and those vanishing points, like I said, the only options that you have is to place them either above or below the horizon line. And you'll want to have a triangle that is as full as possible. So you'll try to avoid like really thin triangles like this by having a vanishing point right there, like too close to the horizon. Because again, you'll be getting a lot of deformation if you do this. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and place a third vanishing point kind of to create an almost near perfect triangle. So it doesn't have to be this way. It's actually, the third vanishing point is actually better, and you'll get less deformation, and it'll be less fake looking the further away it is from the horizon line. So if it's too close, you'll get a lot of deformation. It's gonna be a more dynamic image, but it might look a little bit wrong, a little bit off. So if you want to play it safe, go ahead and place your point kind of like to get a nice even triangle with even angles on all sides. So vanishing point 3 is going to be right here, and then I'm going to do another one that is obviously wrong, or at least that's not following the guidelines that I'm talking about right here. So it's going to be too close to V1 and too close to the horizon line. We'll call this one V3 as well, and we'll do that next. So first, let's go ahead and draw a simple shape, and there's nothing more simple than a box. So we're going to go ahead and do that again. So first things first, I'm going to go and start with the top face for my box. So very similar to 2-point perspective, we're going to trace our lines for this. And now as you can see, I have kind of like the top face for my box right here. And now, instead of creating a third one just yet, I'm going to go and start from V3 here, the third vanishing point, and connect to all the corners, all the visible corners. So the one on the back here, no need, because it's, unless you're drawing something that's transparent, but in this case, it's going to be behind the cube, so we're not going to be able to see it anyways. And then we're going to connect all those corners to the third vanishing point. And finally, we can kind of like set the limitation for the lower portion of the box, because right now it's just like this really tall box, and we want to make it a cube. So we'll go ahead and trace a line like this, something like that. And then the same thing, go back to V1. And now we have our box in 3-point perspective. So very simple, as you can see. This is definitely not that much more complicated than 2-point perspective. But it looks a little bit better. It looks a little bit more dynamic, as if we're higher than the box and looking at it, and we get this nice difference in. We remove all parallel lines, which tend to take us away from reality, because parallel lines are pretty rare. In nature, you'll find these kind of things more often. So nothing is really parallel when you look at it in perspective, in correct perspective, 3 points. So now we have kind of like a nice box, right? And it looks nice because it is within this triangle that I've been talking about. So this is the triangle that you want most of your things to be in. I'm going to show you what happens if you draw something that's outside of the triangle. We kind of know where the triangle is, right? So I'm going to draw something and kind of just keep extending those lines that we've drawn so far. So instead I'm going to start from here, and the side of the box is going to be maybe this way. And then, so I have, let me extend that a little bit more, so I can reach the side. All right, so the top of my box would instead be this. And now I'm going to draw the height of the box, starting from all corners, all the way down to the third vanishing point. And now you can start to see like a small difference. I'm only able to connect to 2 corners because those are the 2 corners that are visible. The other ones are back there and we won't be able to see it from our point of view. And so now, again, I'm going to draw the lower portion, so the same as the other one, like this. And now I can close this box. And you will probably see and agree that this is kind of a weird box. You know, it kind of works still because we have this other one here in the scene that we can use as a reference, but it's just, yeah, it starts to be a little strange looking. And definitely more deformed than this one right here. And then the more, you know, the farther away that you go, like on the left or outside of this triangle thing, the more you escape from this, the more you draw things that are outside of those boundaries, the more stretched and weird looking they'll be. So best to avoid it if you want to play it safe. And you know, try to draw everything kind of like within that triangle, and you should be all good. All right, now what I am going to do, now that we've seen what a good one looks like, something like this, and now that we've also seen what a not so good one looks like, you know, if you're drawing outside of the kind of like the vanishing point triangle, now I am going to create a triangle that is wrong instead. So I'll, you know, my cube is still going to be within that triangle, at least I'll try, but it'll be instead the vanishing point itself that is kind of off, not the fact that I'm drawing outside of the triangle. All right, so the same applies here. So I'm going to start the same way by drawing kind of like the lower portion of my box. It's this box, we're going to be seeing it from below. We're seeing this box here from the top, so we're able to see the top of the box. But for everything that's above the horizon, as we remember, we'll be looking at it from below. So this is going to be kind of like the underside of my box. So we'll trace 2 points, two convergent lines like this to get the lower portion of this box. And now we have it, as you can see here. So this is the underside of the box, right there. Now the same way that we did, we're going to go ahead and trace some more lines, starting from the vanishing point and connecting to all those corners, as such. And finally, the height of the box, starting from the other 2 vanishing points. There we go. So something like this. And now I can close all of that. And we can see kind of like the deformed mess that this creates, right? So this is it's the same box, using the same tools, but as we can see here, things are much different. I'm just going to try to match the colors so we can have a good idea. But yeah, so this would be this other box, the same box. It's a box still, but it really doesn't look like one. And this is what happens when your vanishing point, your third vanishing point, is too close to the other vanishing point, when it's too close to the horizon, and when it's like not in the center here. So instead of having kind of like a deformation where it would still be deformed, but at least, you know, it wouldn't be kind of like tilting to the left like it is right now. It would already be an improvement if the vanishing point was kind of like right here. But since it is all the way to the side, really close to vanishing point 1, then you get this weird stretching going on like this, as if wind is blowing on this box really hard and pushing it on the side. So yeah, this is the problem that this creates. So again, you'll want to have a triangle that's as nice as full as possible. And what I mean by full is a triangle like this. where you'll have, you know, vanishing point here, 1, 2, and 3. Now, of course, now it's not even straight, but so let's say the horizon is like this. You would have something like that. Or even better, if you want to get even less deformation, you can keep the same distance here for those two and make it even taller. So again, you know, the bottom line right there, this right here, this is your horizon. And this would be vanishing point 1 and 2 right here. V1, V1, V2, V2. And then the third vanishing point would be this one right there. By placing your vanishing points like this in a similar way, you'll get pretty good result. And again, by drawing within this triangle here, you'll get even better results. So best case scenario is you trace a triangle like this, you trace your vanishing point this way, and then you frame your content within the triangle. And then you would have your piece of art that would be in here. This would be the safest way to approach 3-point perspective. And by safest, I just mean that it would be, the result would be something that looks more like what you see with your own eyes. Of course, you know, you can always go and do something like this. So we can always go for more stylized, not stylized, but more dynamic perspective. And that works just as well. It's just, it'll be closer to something, to a result that you would see if you were to look through a camera lens, for example, something that has a very short focal length or something like that. So, you know, if you have something like this, you can definitely have it go outside of the triangle. Like I said, you know, the triangle is just kind of like a guideline, but you can definitely play with that and kind of experiment. And sometimes, you know, if you do it carefully, and if you kind of like experiment with the regular way first, and then you know, get more and more comfortable, you can definitely do things like this, where your subject will be outside of the triangle, and you know, the result, it will be, like I said, something a little bit more dynamic, and that's completely fine. And you can also go above, you know, above the horizon line. That works too. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see what happens. So maybe it goes all the way up here, and so now the result's going to be way out of the canvas, but let's try see what that looks like. So we'll have the faces. This will be one of the face, something like that, and then that will be the side here. And this would be very close to kind of like the results you would get if you were looking through like a fish eye lens. So in this case, you know, if we were to draw this big box here, that's kind of what it would be. We wouldn't be able to see the sides. We'd only be able to see this face here, right there, and we wouldn't be able to see the top because it's above. This top part is above the horizon line, and then we wouldn't be able to see underneath because this line here is below the horizon line. So all we would see is this big face. But essentially, what we have right here would be, you know, if that box here was closed. So if this was like this, we would be looking at the same thing. So a big kind of like a rectangular prism. So there you go. It looks a little bit weird like this, but those two shapes would be essentially kind of like the same. It might not be exactly the same height, but those two shapes would be the same. So as you can see here, since we're way outside of the triangle that we set, you know, the triangle being this thing right here with the focal point there, a vanishing point, I mean. So consider this like the safe zone. So as you can see here, this cube here is way out of it. So it looks really stretched. It's kind of what you get when you do this. So, you know, this is something that you can definitely play with. You can, it can add some really cool dynamism to your pieces, your environments, your objects, whatever it is that you're drawing. But yeah, the moral of the story is to keep it safe, to keep it something that's a little bit more closer to the point of view, or the something that you would see with your own eyes instead of something that you would see through a lens of a camera, something that's deforming reality quite a bit. It's best to keep within this triangle. So let's call it the vanishing point triangle. Now there is one scenario that we haven't covered yet, and it is let's say you have a cube like this or any other, let's say a piece of furniture or something in your scene that you want to actually rotate so that it doesn't line up perfectly with the vanishing points, which in theory should happen quite often. So it's actually fairly simple what you have to do. So the only thing that you have to maintain is that you have to place the other vanishing point for your other object on the same eye level and the same horizon line, and use the same vanishing point 3. In the case of 2-point perspective, it doesn't really matter because there's no third vanishing point, so everything is still going to be just parallel, just vertical lines. But in this case, the only thing that we have to maintain is the third vanishing point and making sure that our first 2 vanishing points are still on the line. So let me show you what this would look like. So in this case, let's say I duplicate those vanishing points here and just move them. So I'm going to slide those right here, and then I'm going to use those to create the new guides and the new box. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new face for this. Something like this. Actually, it may change color because this is going to get a little bit confusing otherwise. So this is going to be the top of the other box, and then we're going to use the new vanishing point here that we have. Now that we have the new cube, well, I wanted to do this first because this is what not to do when drawing an object in perspective and trying to maintain a coherent scene, right? So, when we do this, when we just move the vanishing points like this, this is not going to give us a cube, a shape that is on the same ground as the other one. So this one looks a little bit tilted, almost like it's sinking in the floor. And that's why, because right now it's not in proper perspective based on the first cube that we drew. So what I'm gonna do is erase this thing here because it's not needed, because it's a mistake. The right way to do this is a little bit more tricky than that. So this is one of those things with perspective that sometimes this can get a little bit heavy because we have to do a couple calculations to be able to maintain perspective throughout a scene. So if you're drawing a single object like a box like this, fairly simple. But if you want to draw another box that is kind of just rotated, right, that's not following the same direction, then what we have to find is something called the station points. So to do this, pretty easy to find. It's just extra steps that we make sure that we have to make sure we do. So to find a station point, essentially it's going to be the point at which both convergent lines meet at 90 degrees. So what I'm going to do here is extend from V1 towards V2 at a 45-degree angle. As you can see, with doing this in Photoshop, it's very simple. All we have to do is click Shift, not click, but press Shift while we're drawing the line, and it'll draw a line snapped at 45 degree. So you can do this. You can snap it at different angles, as you can see here. So in increments of 45. So 90, 45, 0. I think you might be able to change that so that you can reduce the increments if needed. But anyways, in this case, 45 is perfect because that's what we want. And I'm going to do the same thing with V2, but the other side, to find the point where they meet. And this point right here, this 90-degree angle, this point here is the station point, so we'll call it S. And to be able to draw another box in the correct perspective in this scene, what we have to do is rotate this entire thing. So what we'll need to do is to, well, actually I should probably draw this on a different layer so it'll be a little bit easier. So I'm going to do this again, hold shift. So this is my S right there, my station point. And what I will need to do in this case is to rotate this while maintaining the same station point. So if I do this here, where the line connects here where they meet the horizon. And I can make this a little bit bigger so that actually reaches. So if I make sure that the station point doesn't move, and I just rotate these lines, these convergent lines, well, where they meet at the horizon, where the new points, the new intersection form, those are going to be my new vanishing points. So let's say I do it this way. I am going to extend my canvas a little bit so that we can see what we have back here. I'll extend the horizon as well. And there we go. So now that we have our new intersection, let me write it down. So this is going to be the new V1, and all the way here is going to be the new V2. And so now I don't need, I don't need this stuff anymore, so we can hide it. We just need to find this again if we want to create new vanishing points for new objects in different angles if needed. So now we're just going to proceed and do what we've been doing so far. So I'm going to draw another square. So I'm going to find the top face, this. And now I'm going to make sure that they all connect to V3. V3 doesn't change as long as the object is laying flat on the floor. And there we go. So this new box here, this would be in proper perspective. There we go. And then since we know that the station point is 90-degree angle, so what we can do, we can also have something like this, so where the line will go all the way straight up. So right here would be let's say a new vanishing point, so maybe V1. Let's do it at the different color, so that's V1 right there. And so since this is 90-degree, the other vanishing point would be non-existent, so it would be parallel to the horizon in this case. So well, what I would need to do here is just it would be like a 1 point perspective almost. So all I need to do is do this, and then the other lines are going to be parallel. And I will still need to go meet V3 down there. And this new box would also fit within the scene with proper perspective, since we're using the station point, the same one for all the different objects. And there we go. So this box would fit right in at a completely different angle. So now we have 3 boxes that fit within the scene, and they fit well. So now we can even go further and increase difficulty a little bit more by including or adding a slope in the mix. So what happens if the object is not laying flat like all the other ones? So let's say one is going up a street or something, or like going down a slope. So what we can do then, it's actually very, very simple. Even though it looks complicated, it's actually very simple. The only difference, so let's say we take this one here, the first one that we did with the vanishing points in red. So let's say I want this cube here to instead be going uphill, right? So we can maintain the same vanishing point, or we can create new vanishing point. It doesn't matter depending on where this box is going. But let's say, for the sake of simplicity, that this one just goes in the same direction as the new one that we're going to create goes in the same direction as this one here that we drew first. So what we have to do, the only thing we have to do in this case, is to raise the vanishing points a little bit higher and raise the horizon as a result. So you raise the horizon. So this is going to be the new horizon for the slope. So instead of going to this vanishing point, this box is going to go uphill all the way to this vanishing point up here. And then it's going to use the same vanishing point here. So V2 is going to be up here instead. V1 is going to be right here. And well, we do the same thing at this point. So I'm going to switch again, and we're gonna draw the vanishing. We're gonna draw the convergent lines to find the new top of the box for this one. And then we're still going to use V3, that never changes. All right, there we go. So now I'm going to close off this box, see what we got. And basically we have the same, similar cube, but instead, I think you'll be able to tell, but is going up. So it's as if, you know, those convergent lines are like a street, and this little box is going up on that street, while the other one is going to a different street. So this one's going on the blue street, and the other box is going on the green streets. So this one instead. So there you go. So with 3-point perspective, this is how you do it. So this is how you include or add a change of height. So let's say the ground is not flat anymore in some areas. This is how you would do it. So you just move the horizon line, maintain the same vanishing points if you want, or you can change the vanishing point and also change the height of the horizon. So you can go higher, you can go lower, depending on how your terrain is essentially. And all of this while maintaining V3. So if V3 is down here, you maintain it. If it's up there, then you maintain it as well. And then, of course, with 2-point perspective, you don't really have to care about V3. All your lines are always going to be vertical, always. So that's easy. Now, the beauty of all of this is that this can work for any kind of perspective. So it works with 1-point perspective, 2, 3, 4, 5. It works all the time. So you can always modify the horizon and then move your vanishing points as long as you rotate them around the station point. Everything should still be fine with your scene. All right, so this is pretty much it. And one thing that you might be wondering now is, so let's say you have 1-point perspective and you want to rotate something. Wouldn't you need 2-point perspective to be able to do that? And well, yes, you are completely correct. If you have a scene that's using just one vanishing point, like, you know, this example right here, what you would need to do is well, come up with a station point. So go down right here. You know, it's a straight line, since your vanishing points you only have one, and then do a 90 degree like this. So we'd have a nice 90 degree angle, and then this right here would be your station point. And then from there, what you would need to do is just select these lines and do a rotation around the station point. Extend those lines all the way to the horizon to find your 2 new vanishing points, essentially, for your 1-point perspective scene. And then you'll be able to place, you know, an object in proper perspective. So rotate an object, for example. So if everything is lined up properly, and you want to add a little bit of dynamism to your whole scene, and kind of like rotate boxes or rotate certain elements, then that's how you do it. But you need an extra vanishing point to be able to do that. So that's it. Like I said, this works for any kind of perspective, and it's really important to know if you want to be able to create all kinds of different scenes. The next type of perspective is, as you've guessed it, 4-point perspective. So this is going to be one that is a little bit interesting. This is something that you probably won't use a whole lot. This one and 5-point perspective are pretty rare, because they're just hard to make. They require a lot more calculation. It's a little bit more complicated. So, and they're just not as natural to look at. So it's definitely as if you're looking through the lens of a camera that's very distorted. That's distorting kind of what you're seeing. So I'm gonna give an example, right? So now we have the 3-point perspective like we've just seen, and 4-point perspective essentially is going to add another vanishing point, but above or below the horizon line. So the opposite side of the third vanishing point. So we'd have well, something kind of like right up here. All right, so that would be vanishing point number 4. So you have something like this, and of course, you know, you don't really need to have them be vertical and like aligned vertically. It's just, it helps. Otherwise, you'll get even more deformation. So it's already a pretty deformed kind of perspective. You'll see how kind of like warped it is. So if you add even more kind of distortion by moving the you know the vanishing point, or not having the two V4, V3 and V4 kind of on the same line, then it just adds to it and it doesn't look that great. So my tip is to just keep them on the same line, or you know, very close to. And then yeah, essentially what we're gonna do is I'm gonna try to do a cube the same way that we've done so far, and we'll see what happens. So this particular perspective type is to solve one issue. So it's to solve the following issue. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to do kind of like a let's say a building where I want to be able to see more detail of the building, right? So what I'm gonna do first is trace those vanishing points. So I'm gonna do, so this is going to be the base of the building. Let's say something like this. So we have the base of the building right there. And then those vanishing points are going to touch the corner, go all the way up here. Same thing, touch this corner on this side here, the intersection. And then the first corner in front. All right, so there we go. And now, so yeah, so let's say I want to have this building and I want to see all the way up this building. So I want to see as high as I can. So this would mean that I wouldn't stop at the horizon. I would, so if this is the base of the building right here, what I would want is to keep going above the horizon line or below, depending on your drawing. But let's say this is a building right here, and you know, like you have like windows and stuff. So now the problem with extending a building like this, if I only have 3 vanishing point to work with in 3-point perspective, is that I'll never be able to see the top of the building in this case, because it'll get just wider and wider like this until it becomes too wide for the canvas, and then we'll just lose, you know, the top portion of the building. I'll never be able to see it, as opposed to the lower portion of this building. If I wanted to extend it down, right now, you know, I'm considering that this here where it stops, this is where the ground is. So maybe, you know, like this is the street right here, you know, where the cars are, whatever. In this case, you know, if I want to make the building even taller, what I can do is get rid of those lines right here and extend it all the way down to the vanishing point. And this would mean that this building is almost infinitely tall. So it goes all the way down to the vanishing point as far as the eye can see. And then you would have this really, really, really big building. So, you know, those are all the windows. And then the windows start to get a little bit bigger so you can see them. So this, you know, done really quickly. So, but you know, you can imagine. Then you'd have other windows like this, and then yeah, it would go all the way down and until all the lines of the buildings go down to a single point, and that's all you would be able to see. It would end at that one point at V3. So that's great because it allows me to see the entire building all the way down. But if I want to see the top of the building, I can't because I don't have an extra vanishing point up top. It just crops, right? So there's a way to solve that, obviously, and it's to add another vanishing point. So if I add another vanishing point in here, and especially in this case, because the vanishing point is within my canvas, we'll be able to see it. Of course, you know, it might be a good idea, again, to reframe your canvas a little bit. So maybe to crop it like this, so we don't see the vanishing point within your canvas. But anyways, I'm just going to show you kind of what the result is when that happens. So by adding an extra vanishing point at the top here, this will allow me to do the same thing that I did at the bottom here. So I'll be able to see all the way down or all the way up to the building. So let's try it. So in this case, everything that's above the horizon is not going to behave like this anymore. Instead, everything that is above the horizon, or if V3 was here and V4 was down, it would be the opposite, of course. But in this case, what's going to happen is that, well, this building is going to go this way instead. So it'll go, when it crosses the horizon, it'll start instead to go towards the fourth vanishing point. So it'll be something like that. So I'm going to add a couple more separations in here so it's a little bit easier to see what's going on. All right, so this is kind of what it would look like if I were drawing this, if this big building, instead of being a building starting on the ground, or actually, yeah, if the ground is right here. So I'm going to chop this building off and add the ground back again and erase kind of like the lower portion. But if this is the ground and you have, maybe like little bushes here and a little path, and maybe like a door like this, something like that. And yeah, and then you're looking at this building in 4-point perspective. If we're not going to do anything, if we're just going to add another vanishing point and keep using straight lines, well, this is kind of what you would get. So it would look like a really, really strange building. A building that just breaks almost kind of like in the center where the horizon line is. Obviously, this doesn't work. So the one thing that you need to do when working with 4-point perspective is to introduce curved lines. And I've just added kind of like the top of the building right here. So that we have kind of like an end to this building. It doesn't go all the way to the vanishing point. But yeah, so and those curved lines, what's very particular about this is that it's only going to be between the vanishing points that are not on the horizon. So the vanishing points 1 and 2, those will still use the straight line. So the base of the building will still be square like this, and the top will still be at a straight angle. But what is going to be different is that the lines from vanishing point 4 to 3 or 3 to 4 are going to be curved instead. So we're going to take another color to add those in, and instead of having those straight lines that don't work, we'll have to use guides that that are straight. So not straight, but that are curved. So if we go straight down here, there's no curve needed. So obviously this one, if this one is not going to be curved because it's very similar to kind of like the horizon here. But as soon as you go away from that, then you'll start to curve the line a little bit, and it'll curve more and more and more and more as you get further away from this middle line, from this straight line. So curve some more, and there's really no limit to this. So it can curve as much as you want if you get really, really far. So if you get all the way down here, all the way back here, past maybe the vanishing point, it'll obviously not really work, but you can still do it. But if I draw kind of like the outer curve here for the building, this would be something like that, right? So instead of the blue that we have right there, instead of the straight lines, we would need to add something that's like this instead. So let's say it goes a little bit further. And I'm going to try to follow the curve as best as I can. So something like that. And then we'd want to do the same thing on the other ends as well. And then the side of the building would follow the same kind of curved line. There you go. So there you have it. That's kind of what you would get instead. And then the same deal for this one here, slight curve. So all the vertical lines would suddenly have to curve to allow this extra vanishing point to exist. And and the vanishing point, the convergent lines for vanishing point 1 and 2, they would just remain the same. So yeah, everything that is kind of like a horizontal line-ish is going to be straight, like the green lines here, and everything that's vertical-ish is going to be curved. So essentially, that's how you create 4-point perspective. It's a little bit more complicated because you have to do those curved lines, and then when you introduce curved lines, it means that you can't really use the ruler anymore. You can't use tools to create straight lines, so it's a little bit more complicated because you have to probably like hand draw most of this. And drawing curves and long straight curves, not straight but long curves, is it's a little bit tricky. It requires added dexterity. So yeah, that's kind of like the extra layer of difficulty that you add when you add a fourth vanishing point and working in 4-point perspective. But I mean, aside from that, everything else is pretty much the same. So if you were to draw windows, for example, like the base of the window would just still follow this one line here, our guide, and it would follow this one too at the top, and then it would just need to follow those new curved lines that we introduced. And then the same thing for the other side here. The top and the bottom would still be straight, and then we would have to curve the line from one vanishing point to the other to find that vertical line for the window. So something like that. One more thing that you probably noticed is now that we have 4 points, we're not going to have a triangle anymore. So instead of having a triangle that we had before, or like a safety triangle where things don't deform too much, instead we'll have a diamond, right? So it's going to be like this, still going from one vanishing point to the other one. So this would be the safe zone for things that we want to draw. Everything outside of this zone, just like we saw with the triangle and 3-point perspective, everything outside of that zone is going to be quite deformed. So it's already pretty deformed because we have 4-point perspective, and things are like warped, and that's why we're getting this curve right there, as if we're looking through like a not quite, but like a fisheye lens. So yeah, if you go outside of these boundaries, then things will get pretty funky real quick. So once again, I highly recommend that you stay within that diamond, within those boundaries. But yeah, you can experiment. If you want to stretch things out, if you want those curves here to go outside of there, and see what you can get with that, you'll feel free. But yeah, for things that are a little bit more realistic, then you'll want to stick with something inside those boundaries. And I just want to mention also, if I'm going through those a little bit quick, don't worry, because I'll be doing an exercise, an example for all those different perspectives that we've just looked at in more detail in real time. So you'll be able to to follow along kind of the process of doing a real illustration using those rules, those kind of perspectives. But yeah, as far as 4-point perspective, I mean, that's all the theory that is behind it. It's fairly simple. It's just you add in an extra point, and then as a result, you have to curve kind of like the vertical lines in your drawing. That is the added difficulty, but that's as far as everything else, that's pretty much it. So we are now going to take a look at 5-point perspective, and just so you know, this is as high as it gets. We're not going to look at 6-point because that doesn't exist. Well, it does kind of exist, but it really doesn't make much sense. So yeah, we're going to take a look at 5-point perspective. So 5-point perspective is very, very similar to looking at a chrome ball and seeing the reflection of things, or looking through a legit fish eye lens where you get to see everything that is in front of you. All right, when it comes to 5-point perspective, the one big difference here is that you'll have to use a grid to be able to draw anything. Just like we've been drawing convergent lines to be able to kind of guide us to make sure our perspective is accurate. When all the lines, all the guidelines in here are curved, then the grid becomes even more important. So This is a grid kind of that you should be using. This is also going to be included, so it's a grid that I made, and it's very simple. So it's the same, you know, we have very similar things. So we have the horizon right here, and then we'll have the first and second vanishing point, V1, V2, V3 at the bottom here, V4, and then the fifth one is going to be in the center in this case. So this is going to be, I'm not going to write it, but V5 in the center right there. So those will be our 5 convergent points, vanishing points, excuse me. So with this, it's going to be pretty similar in a sense to what we've seen with 4-point perspective. The main difference in this case is that the horizontal lines are going to be curved as well, as you can see here. They're not straight anymore. And the only straight lines are going to originate from the center point in here. So when you look at it, when you look at this, it looks like a sphere. It looks like a circle, and it is, right? So 5-point perspective is always going to be based off a circle like this. When you're drawing something within this circle, within those boundaries, you can't really draw anything outside of it. That wouldn't work. So in this case, you know, this is the circle area. This is the only area that you'll be able to draw in. Outside of this wouldn't make sense. So it would just curve kind of like to infinity on the edge here. And what you would be seeing with this, what this represents, this sphere right there, is half of any given environment. So it's not really a field of vision, but it's more like, let's say you are within a sphere, you're inside a sphere, like almost like a video game. You're inside and you're kind of looking around, and everything that you would see, so let's say you're seeing the sky, let's say you're seeing a forest and things like that. Imagine all of those things kind of projected onto the surface. So what you're looking at is the surface here, and that sphere here represents, it's not really a sphere, but it's a half sphere. It represents half the environment. So if you had, for example, 6-point perspective, 6-point perspective, basically what it is just duplicating the sphere. So you would have another sphere like this, and that would be kind of like the back view, right? So let's say this is what you're seeing in front. The other sphere, the other circle, would be everything that you're seeing in the back. So when you combine those two circles, those two spheres, those two half spheres, it would create the full sphere, which represents the full environment. But yeah, in this case, since it's just half of it, it will be half the environment. And that also means that everything that gets to the edges here, as you can see, you know, everything that's in the center here, the squares here, you have some nice squares that are, you know, they look pretty square, even if they're a little bit curved. They're mostly squared. But as you get to the side here and then the corners, things get a little bit more deformed, and then it gets really, really stretched, like for this one here. So this square right here and this square right here, that's the same. It's just very, very distorted as you get closer to the edges, because essentially we're trying to represent a 3D environment. So yeah, a 3D scene on a 2D canvas. So you know, very similar to how most maps will represent the world in a stretched way. So all the continents that are on the edge, not on the edge, but like towards the top, like you know, like Russia and Australia, those will be very, very deformed and pretty far from their actual size, just because we're representing a sphere and the Earth onto a 2D medium. So enough talking, let's see how this actually works. So to create anything on here, so we'll start again with our trusted cube. So it's very simple once we have a grid like this. So I'm gonna go and let's say try to start from here. So I'm gonna trace the base face of the cube. So I'm gonna go with that. Then I'll go all the way up here, and then maybe this line right there. And then we're going to close it. So that would be, or this can actually be the top of the cube. And then we'll have it go down. So go down 2 units. So I'm going to follow this curve here as best as I can. Something like that. And I'm going to follow this line right here since it lands right on it. And then close the shape. And then I'm going to do it exactly the same thing with this one right here. So I'm going to follow that line. So I'm going to follow this line here and that curved line here and try to do kind of like the average in the center. So try to find kind of like the center point right here, something like that. And then I can close off the shape. And I would have my cube in 5-point perspective. So I can draw another one, maybe one right here. Try to follow the line as best as I can. And then that one would go maybe all the way up here. And since the top of this box lands right onto the horizon line, as you can see, the top of the box is going to be just a flat line, so I'm not going to be able to see on top of it. But yeah, there we go. And then I'm going to try to draw one that's really close to the edges here to see how deformed it gets. And then it's going to be, let's say, 2 squares across. I'm going to follow the line again right here where it meets that one line. Like this. And then I'm going to do the same thing. So it's starting from here. I'm going to follow that line. Follow, follow, follow. And then that's probably a little bit too long, but then something like this. So, you know, this line that I just traced, right, this one right here, I'm just kind of doing the average of this line here, this guide here, and this guide here, and trying to create a line that's right in the middle, right there, something like this. So that would be another square. So as you can see here, when it gets closer to the edges of the sphere, things get a little bit more stretched. And that's normal. So that's kind of how you would draw things, or that's how you would draw simple shapes using 5-point perspective. As I've said, you really need a grid for this because it makes things a lot easier. Otherwise, drawing all of this by hand, I don't know, it gets a little bit crazy. So definitely use that grid, you know, if this is something that you want to do. And this can create some pretty cool images. Now, you might be wondering, let's say, you know, right now, all these cubes are very, very nicely oriented and pointing towards that vanishing point right here, the 5th one. What if I want to draw a cube that's not aligned this way? So maybe I want the cube to rotate a little bit, you know? The best way to do this is still to start with cubes or simple shapes. And very similarly to what I've explained in the first perspective class, it's best to start with a cube since it's the easiest to draw in correct perspective. And then from there, what you can do is sculpt your cube. So let's say I wanted to create a cube that it's in a different position maybe. So what I would do, I would draw this one first, you know, something like this first, and then I would chop it off. So maybe I'm gonna cut it like this, and then I'm gonna do the same thing right here. I'm gonna cut it on the other side too. Now that you have this, you have, you know, we know that we have this face right here, and that face is exactly the same as this one here that we're not seeing right now. So what we can do is draw those same lines using kind of like reference points from this top face. So I know that this line right here begins, you know, it starts right in the middle of this edge, so right about here, and then it goes to the corner, so like this. And then this one here, similar, starts at the corner and lands about like maybe 2/5 of this distance here, so something like right about there. And then we can erase the lines that we don't need anymore and just like connect the dots. So connect one corner to the other. And again, you know, following those lines as best as we can. Like this. Following the guidelines. So it still needs to be curved a little bit. But yeah, there we go. So this one here needs to be curved as well. Just a little bit. So I'm trying to follow this guideline right there. something like that. And now you would have kind of a cube in a different angle. So this is how I would approach, cutting things up and essentially drawing more complicated shapes, or shapes that are still simple but in a more tricky angle. So there you go. And then if you wanted to create cylinders, it's the same deal. We know how to draw circles in space, how to draw a circle on two different faces. So it would be exactly the same thing here. All the same tools that we've seen would apply. But there you go. So that would pretty much cover all the different types of perspective that are relevant. There is one more that doesn't really work on its own, or it does, but it's one that is really used to complement other types of perspective. So that's why, in my opinion, it's not as important. But atmospheric perspective is one that we really need to take a look at, because it will be present in pretty much all forms of other perspectives. So 1 point, 2 point, 3 and 4, 5. What it is essentially is this. So atmospheric perspective, also called aerial perspective, by the way, is a method of creating the illusion of depth, or the illusion of recession in a painting or drawing by modulating, by adjusting the color to simulate changes affected by the atmosphere on the colors of things seen at a distance. So it's a mouthful, but essentially what we're trying to do with this is to adjust the painting depending on how much air is separating us and the subject that we're looking at. So if we're looking at something that's really up close, it's not going to be that much air, so the effect is going to be minimal. But if we're looking at something that's really, really far, on the other hand, then atmospheric perspective will play a big role. So even though he didn't invent the term, or not the term, but even though he wasn't the first to use it, Leonardo da Vinci was the first to actually use the term and write it down. And he was essentially saying that the quote, colors become weaker in proportion to their distance from the person who is looking at them. Now, it was only later that we discovered the relationship between different wavelengths and color, and how colors are associated to different wavelengths. So like we've seen, the visible light spectrum is from about 400 to 700 nanometers, where in the 400 range, you will have the colder colors, kind of like the violets and the blues. And then in the higher range, in the 700s, you will have the reds. And I need to take a little bit of time here to give you kind of a quick physics class to help understand how atmospheric perspective works properly. So I apologize if this is something that you know, but I would guess that most people don't really know about this. So we're going to start first with, why is the sky blue? So the sky is blue because it's the only color that gets scattered in the atmosphere. So if there was no scattering at all, then the sky wouldn't be blue. The sky would simply be all black. But when we are seeing that light through a really thick atmosphere, a big chunk of gas, something happens. There's some scattering of light happening here. So when the sunlight enters the atmosphere, it must pass through many tiny molecules like oxygen, water vapor, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, etc. And also many particles of dust and pollen. So there's a lot of stuff here. So you can imagine this whole thing as kind of a window that is tinted, but very, very, very lightly. So if you see just one window and you look through it, you're probably not going to notice that it's tinted at all. But if you stack them up, if you stack maybe like 10 windows on top of each other, now it'll become more apparent. And then if you stack 100 of them, 1,000 of them, then it's possible that the light's not going to be able to make it through the windows at all once you stack them up so much. And this is kind of what happens here with the sun. So the sunlight can only travel so far, and when it travels through the atmosphere, let's say at midday, when the sun is shining straight down, then it doesn't have to go through as much atmosphere. What happens here is that shorter wavelengths are more likely to get blocked. Longer wavelength will travel further and are less likely to get blocked by all the particles in the atmosphere. So if something is going to block the light, if something is going to scatter the light, blue light, shorter wavelength, are always going to be scattered first. This is essentially what happens with the sky. When the sunlight goes through the atmosphere, all the lights make it through, no problem, but the blue light gets scattered a little bit. So it bumps into different molecules, and it just scatters in all direction. And this is why we see the sky as it is, a blue tint. Now, what happens, let's say the atmosphere becomes significantly thicker now, so that the sunlight has to go through a much thicker atmosphere than during daylight. You can equal that to a sunset, where the angle of the sun will mean that it has to go through a much thicker atmosphere to reach our eye, as opposed to just like at noon, for example, where it's shining straight down through a thinner atmosphere. What happens when it has to go through a much thicker atmosphere is that most of the light is going to get scattered, and it's only the longest wavelength that are able to travel the farthest are going to be able to reach our eye, which is why we normally see the sunset as like an orange, reddish tint, yellow, orange, and red in those areas, because only the wavelength closer to the 700 nanometer range are going to be able to reach our eye. All the other ones, all the shorter the wavelengths, are going to get completely scattered before they reach us. For example, if we had like a really, really, really thick atmosphere all the time, then what might happen is that less of the blue light might be able to make it to our eyes. So we would see, even during daytime, we would see the sky a much darker color, maybe something closer to like greens, or even a dark orange if the atmosphere is really, really thick. So you would kind of get the same effect as a sunset, but during a midday. And then at sunset, well, the angle would probably be too intense, and the sunlight would have to go through too much atmosphere, where you probably wouldn't see it at all. It would just be black. So the sun would just disappear before it crosses the horizon. So now that we know that the wavelength associated with blue is the first one to get scattered and to reach our eye, we don't see the sky as being violet for many reasons. I'm not 100% sure on all the reasons, but it's mostly due to the fact that violet just simply doesn't reach our eye. It gets scattered before it reaches us. So the next in line, the next wavelength that we're able to see are the blue ones, because those get scattered, but not enough that they are not able to reach our eye. So now that we know that the atmosphere will scatter blue light under normal circumstances, well, this also explains why if there's a really, really big distance between you and an object, like you and a mountain in the far distance, then the atmosphere, all the air in between you, will be enough to scatter light a little bit, meaning that the light from the mountain is not going to reach your eye perfectly. So the light from the sun will bounce on the mountain and then go to your eye, but before it reaches your eye, it'll have to go through another kind of another thickness, another layer of atmosphere, and that will scatter the light some more, meaning that the mountain or the object is going to take a bluish tint. And then that effect will be more pronounced the farther the object is. So it's interesting because this scattering effect only happens when the light goes through smaller molecules, smaller particles, and only then do they get scattered. With bigger particles like water droplet in the air, for like a fog or like a mist or something like that, those particles are going to be too big for the light to scatter at all. So we'll just see it as its real color. It'll just be white. Now, also very similarly to the fog effect that I just mentioned, bigger particles like dust and pollen are not going to be scattering the light as much as smaller molecules like air and water vapor, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, etc. But what they will do, on the other hand, is make the objects that are really, really far away appear brighter than they are. The reason being that all those tiny particles are reflecting light to us. So they're catching light, then reflecting it back to us. And they're not scattering the light, they're just reflecting the light. So we're going to see them as just wider, essentially. So the further away an object is, given that there is dust in the air, even small amount of dust or pollen or water droplet in the air, objects that are far away will appear brighter than they are. And then when you combine this with the bluish tint that the objects will take if they are really, really far away because of the scattering in the atmosphere, in the air, the scattering of the light, then you add those two and it makes objects further away brighter and bluer. And of course, all these effects that I've been talking about, those are only applicable at ground levels. As the atmosphere gets less and less dense, as you get closer and closer to outer space, the bluish tint will start to disappear, and this is why, in space you don't see any blue whatsoever. It's just black. There's no atmosphere. There's no light at all being scattered because there's no particles scattering the light whatsoever. So there it is. I hope this explains kind of the reason why atmospheric perspective works, and the reason also why things tend to take on a bluish and lighter shades when they are at a great distance from yourself, from the viewer. So not only does atmospheric perspective add some really, really cool colors to your paintings, to your artwork, but it also brings them a little bit closer to reality in how it represents and how accurately it represents the physics of light scattering through the atmosphere. In this first exercise, we are going to take a look at 3-point perspective. So this is going to be, as I've mentioned before, the one type of perspective that you are most likely to use whenever you draw something in perspective, because it's the one that is the most accurate as far as how you see with your own eyes. So there's all the other types of perspective will be something that you'll most likely see if you're looking through the lens of something, like a lens of a camera that deforms or flattens perspective. But with your own eyes, 3-point perspective is really kind of the one of the closest to reality that you'll see and work with. So that and 4-point perspective, which is why we'll be covering both of them in these exercises. But the first one, 3-point perspective, this is what we're going to start with, and the topic of this is going to be a wall, a big wall with a gate in it. I mean, you don't really have to do the gate, but the topic is going to be a massive wall, right? So it can be something that's on the ground, below the horizon, if you can find a way to make that work. In my case, it's going to be above the horizon line, and I am going to start, as we have seen before, by drawing my vanishing point. So I have my horizon right here, and then if we remember the first perspective class, when the horizon line is lower on the canvas, it tends to make things appear bigger because it lowers kind of our it shortens us in the scene. It makes us seem like we're closer to the ground looking up. And then when you look up, normally things tend to look more imposing. And then if we were looking at something that's underground, or not underground, but below the horizon line, like a cave or like a crevice or like a huge cliff, like looking down at a huge cliff, then we would probably want to do it the other way around, where the horizon line is higher in the canvas. And it just gives us more dynamic, more interesting compositions, more interesting pieces. So if you were to leave it down, right down the center, it depends. It really depends on the subject, depends on the topic. If it's something that doesn't need to be displayed at or portrayed as something that's really high and imposing, or something that's really, really low and deep, then why not? Place it in the center. It's all up to you. But in this case, it'll look better, and it will look more imposing if it's lower in the canvas. So I am going to start by, like I said, drawing the vanishing point. So for this, I have a cool tool here, and then for this to work, I have to lower the image size. I'll bring it back up once I'm done drawing the vanishing points. You'll see why, because the brush is not big enough. So I have this brush here that I will be including with the class, and essentially it's just a vanishing point and convergent lines brush. So it just tap once and then it creates a bunch of lines. Pretty useful. So for this one, I'm actually going to make the canvas a little bit wider and taller than it needs to be. So the first convergent lines, the first vanishing point is going to be right here. The other one is going to be something like here. And then the third vanishing point is going to be, because I will be including this vanishing point here, the second one, in my image, so that since I have a gate, it will look nice, you know, if we're able to see through the gate. If I don't have this vanishing point in here, it'll be a little bit harder for the gate to be able to, for us to be able to see through the gate. And you'll see what I mean once I do it. So in this case, you know, if I don't want to have too much stretching, I'll place a third vanishing point as high as I can and kind of close to this. I mean, kind of lined up, not perfectly lined up with this, but slightly kind of above, you know, like closer to the second vanishing point. So yeah, this should give me a pretty cool composition. So with my vanishing points drawn right now, I can go back here and increase the size again. So we'll go up 200%. So this way, you know, the guides might be getting a little bit blurry because we scale them up, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that the rest of the drawing is crisp and high enough resolution. So we are ready to start. So now that I have a bunch of guides and it's really easy, as you can see here. So I'm gonna draw kind of like the frame that I'll be focusing on. So maybe it'll be something like this. Maybe even bigger than that. So this is the frame that I'll be working with. And everything that I draw will be going inside of this. So as I've mentioned before, you know, I have my vanishing points outside of the canvas that I'll be focusing on. There's this one here, so it's kind of an exception, but this one here is inside, and that's fine. You know, you can always have one. That's okay. You just don't want the vanishing points to be too close to each other. Essentially, that's what it is. But you know, if they're far enough, if it creates a nice triangle. So as you can see here, we have one here, one vanishing point here, another one here, another one here. You know, this is a full triangle. It's something it's a big enough triangle. It's not too flat, not too thin. That should work. So I am going to start by blocking things in. As we remember, it's always best to start super simple with just big squares and then sculpt them into what we want later. But so my horizon line is right here. So this is gonna stay there. And then the wall will be probably like this tall. So I'll use this line right here for my wall, the top of my wall. And then the gate will be maybe like this. Maybe I'll go a little bit higher. Make it seem a little bit more imposing. All right, something like that. So that's gonna be my gate, and right now I need to add a little bit of thickness to that, so make that gate thicker. So that's going to be the other side, thickness of my gate. And yeah, the other side right here. All right, so now since I don't want things to look too flat, I'm gonna add some stairs in here. So the stairs are gonna start right there at the point. I'm gonna go down all the way here to about the edge of it. Something like that. And then they're gonna keep on going. Lower and lower. And if you don't have enough convergent lines, well, you can always add some more. In this case, I'm missing a couple here. And adding these will make things a little bit easier. All right. Something like this. There we go. Now I have like my stairs done. Just need to connect the lines properly. Okay, and I don't want to get into too many details, so let's stop here for the stairs. We'll get back to those later. But now let's add a couple more things, emphasizing this area right here. So since everything goes to this point, everything, all the focus, our eyes are drawn to the convergent lines, all these lines pointing to the same spot. Let's try to accentuate this even more. So maybe add kind of like another wall, or maybe a couple things, kind of another separation for the wall maybe. So let's see if we add something like this. So we wouldn't see that anymore. And of course, maybe the wall, the top of the wall can be this here. And maybe this is just an extra portion on top, kind of like sitting on top of the wall. Something like that. And then this way I'll be able to have like some cool details like this. Like maybe like just reinforcing structures that's reinforcing. And keeping kind of the roof part in place. Something like that. Go ahead and add an extra line here to line all of these details up. That. Like that. And now drawing these should be a little bit simpler. All right, now it's starting to look like something. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a hole in this thing here so we can see through it a little bit more. So as if there was like another gate. And I'm not gonna have the gate too close to the side here because it's starting to get deformed quite a bit. So maybe something like this. Gonna be another gate that's pretty thick. And then maybe there's like something in front here that's hiding the deformation, because this area is starting to stretch quite a bit. So I'm going to add something in the foreground like this to hide part of that gate, to minimize the effect of the distortion in the image. there's one extra trick that I really wanted to cover when it comes to repetition. So as you can see here in this particular scene, there's going to be a lot of things that repeat themselves, and like repeating objects, repeating shapes are a little bit tricky if you want to eyeball them, because as they get further away in the distance, they're supposed to get closer and closer together, or at least appear closer together. So right now, so far I've only been eyeballing it, and for something this insignificant, it really doesn't matter in this particular case. Like at the end it'll end up looking okay, but if you wanted to do something where you need to have, like a fence for example, where you need to have all of the posts be at the same distance and have those working in perspective, there's a trick for that. And that can be also like if you're drawing windows for a building and you want the windows to be all the same size, but also work in perspective. So there's a lot of different uses for this little trick here, and it's actually quite simple. It's just you just have to know it. So the way that we would do this is we're going to use triangles again. So it's very similar to what we've done so far. So let's say I want these posts here. So let's say this is a fence, and I want these to all be in perspective and all be the same distance. So I want this distance here to remain the same, even when placed in perspective. So the way to do this is we're going to have to consider that the fence, or whatever it is that we're trying to draw, is a square or rectangle again. So very similar to what we did to draw circles or ellipses on a surface, on a planar surface. So the way we're going to do this is we take a rectangle like this, and we're going to consider that this portion right here, this is going to be our first post. And if it was a window, then it would be, we would make it a little bit bigger, but whatever. And then the second post is going to be this right here. And then that distance in the center, that would be the distance between the two posts that we want. All right. So, and now what we would want to do with this now is to split this in half. So we want to find the middle portion of this square. So this will be right here. And then what we're going to do is have a line split that shape in half, split that rectangle in half. And then to find the next post, which is basically what we're trying to find here, to find the next one, the way to do this is you just you go from one corner right here of the square that we created, and you go through the middle point of the next item that you're trying to copy over. So if it's a window, you go through the center of the window where that line is dividing it, and then you go all the way until you reach kind of like this line right here at the bottom. So this would be the other corner for your other shape. And then we can close the shape again, and then we can draw the other posts. So that would be the other post, and those three posts would be at equal distance from one another. And so we can do this now in perspective, and I'll show you how to do this. So let's say we have a square like this, and we're going to trace the horizon. So the horizon is right here. Let's do just one vanishing point right now, but this works for for all kinds of different perspective. It's the same principle. So we're going to trace kind of like our fence going all the way to the vanishing point on the horizon. This is going to be vanishing point 1. In this case, it's only going to be 1. Our fence is going to be in blue. And so here you go. So this is going to be the fence. And what we're trying to do now is, come up with all the other posts and have them be at the proper distance if they are to be in perspective at equal distance from one another. So let's say I'm going to draw the other one. The second one that you're drawing is arbitrary. So if you want it to be at a certain distance, whatever, put it wherever you want. But with two of them, all we need is 2. So with these 2 traced, now what we can do is deduct where the third one is going to go. So we want to find the center point for this kind of this square that we created, this one right here. So we want to find out the middle the center. So going from here, cross in the center where the two diagonals meet. There we go. So now we have the center for the fence. And now all we have to do is take that corner right here and have it touch in the center here where the second post is cut in half and project it until it reaches the second convergent lines right there. So this would be the base for the next post. And then all we have to do like this is keep repeating this process. So cross in the center, we have our next post. Go back one, cross in the center, and we have our next post. And rinse and repeat. As you can see, each of the posts, every time they're getting closer and closer to one another. But they are, if they were flat, if we were seeing this thing flat, they would be at equal distance. They're getting closer and closer because they're just going towards the horizon, so everything seems like it's getting closer to one another. But this way, you can maintain the same distance, and it's actually really, really simple to do. It just takes a couple extra steps, but this way you'll be able to draw fences or windows or whatever it is that you're trying to draw and want to repeat. So any kind of detail that you want to repeat, you can use this trick with it. There we go. All right, now I'm pretty much done with all the basic shapes. As you can see here, super simple still. It's all geometric shapes in the very simplest form. Triangles, squares, rectangles. And now the last kind of element that I want to add before I have pretty much everything I need in there is just two big columns next to the gate to add one more type of shapes, so cylinders. That's something that we don't have yet. So I'm gonna add two big cylinders going, let's see, going maybe all the way up here. So again, I'm going to start with just a long rectangle, and then we're going to shape it into a cylinder a little bit later. This curve is not quite correct, but it doesn't matter for now. Just trying to make it look something like a cylinder. So there's one. We'll make sure that is correct later. And it goes like this. So right about here is going to be the top of the other one. And let's have it go down like this. Right. There we go. So now I would have kind of all the elements that I need in the scene to create something cool. So from there, you know, it would be only a matter of adding details and sculpting all those basic geometrical shapes into something a little bit more interesting, basically. So let's start by erasing a couple stuff here. So these lines will not be visible anymore. All of that we're not going to be able to see. All right. I'm going to tweak the roundness of this thing here. So what I want to do essentially is make a square at the top and then draw my circle within that square. There we go. So that would be kind of like the square at the top of the column. Maybe it goes a little bit higher than that, actually. If you want to map the other side, something like this. And then within this square, I am going to draw a circle, and that's going to be kind of like the top. Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. Actually, my circle needs to be a little bit better, bigger than this. All right, that's about right. So, you know, again, to draw a circle like this, what you would do is you draw the square. I did it kind of quickly, so let me do that again here in a more clear way. Change colors so that's more visible. And then, so now I have a square. I'm going to split it in half. Using diagonals. There we go. So now I know that this is going to be the center of my circle. And all I have to do is mark the points where it's going to touch. Right here, right here, right here, right here. I'm going to go like this. And there you go. So that's how you would draw a circle in this case. So it's very similar. I mean, it's not only similar, it's actually exactly the same thing. But yeah, it'll make the circle look a little bit more deformed than in 2-point perspective or in 1-point perspective. But the process is exactly the same. So that's kind of what I did in a little bit faster way. But yeah, so, you know, depending, if I had like a big circle really, really up close to the camera, I would probably spend a little bit more time. But since this is a column that, you know, I'm probably going to have some more details on top here. So it doesn't really matter. That's perfect. It is definitely close enough. So, and then the other one here, we're not even going to see because it's outside of the canvas. So no need to bother. But yeah, so there we go. So now I have pretty much everything in my scene. Now it's just a matter of getting rid of some of the guides here, so that's not as distracting. So I'm gonna make my selection here. And then actually I have enough guides in here that I can pretty much do everything else. So I have enough lines in here that I can always use those, you know, even if my new lines don't line up exactly with the existing guides, the existing convergent lines. I should have enough in here to be able to do whatever I want. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna crop this out. So now I'm only left with what I need. There we go. So now let's jump in and add a little bit of details in there. And yeah, I mean, at this point, there we go. I'll be pretty much done. So I'm going to stop here. I could keep going on this for a very long time, you know, adding a bunch of details, refining the details that I have, refining the shapes even more. But I am going to stop here. And you will see that as you add more and more details, it'll become harder and harder to understand. So having good line weight, where the lines closer to the camera are a little bit thicker and a little bit darker than the lines that are further away from the camera, really helps to really helps the viewer to read kind of the shapes of what's going on if things get really busy. And of course, you can always add a little bit of shading here and there if you're comfortable with that. So this is what I'm going to be doing right now. But everything I do from this point forward is going to be kind of just bonus. So shading is definitely not something that we've covered yet. So I'm not going to go into too much details there. But I'm trying just to imagine that whatever is not going to be hit directly by the sun is going to be in the shadows. So I'm just going to try to fake some shadows in here really quickly. But as you've seen, this is pretty much the process. So very similar again. You know, we always start with something super simple. We start with geometric shapes, the simplest volumes we can find, because those are always easier to draw in perspective. And then from there, we just sculpt those down exactly the same way as a traditional sculptor would do it. So you start with big shapes, and then you refine and refine and refine and refine until you have your final product. And of course, it's always a question of when to stop, when are you done, because we can always go forever, add more and more details. But in this case, this is where I'll stop. And you are, if this is something that you're going to put in your portfolio, I would really, really encourage you to spend more time on this, to add more details, to really go all out, because not that many people do these. It's one of those things that it's always impressive when perspective is well executed, and always makes really, really cool portfolio pieces if done right. But anyways, there you have it. I am looking forward to seeing yours as well. I'll talk to you later. This next exercise is going to be significantly more complicated. So in this one, we're going to introduce perspective or foreshortening for drawing characters. So like I've mentioned before, 4-point perspective is a really cool and really dynamic way to draw characters because it allows you to see to see them all the way to their head and all the way to their feet in a kind of a more humane way. Not humane, that's not the right word, but in a more realistic way almost. So as if you were looking at them directly. So let's say you are looking at someone that's really tall and you have to, tilt your head up to be able to see their face. Then you would normally see a little bit from like under their chin, under their nose. So you would see them as if you were as if you were smaller than them, because you actually are. So your point of view will be lower than theirs. But you'll also be able to look down on their feet. So you're So you're at the same time able to look up to someone and look down at their feet. And this is going to be what we're trying to achieve here with 4-point perspective when drawing characters. So let's get started. We have this this grid here that we worked on in the first term. So what we are first going to be attempting is to reproduce this grid here, not the character yet. We're trying to reproduce the grid in 4-point perspective, and then we'll be able to draw kind of everything that's within those squares more accurately. So I'm going to increase the size of this canvas to be able to add 2 vanishing points at the top, and then I'm going to go ahead and draw those vanishing points and the horizon line. So the horizon is going to be kind of like right down the middle for this guy, so right at the crotch level. It could be anywhere really, but we're just going to keep it simple. So the halfway point, his halfway point of his body is going to land right on the horizon line. So half of his body is we're going to look up to it, and then the other half, the lower half, we're going to look down to it on it. So there we go. So we have the vanishing point 1 is going to go right here. Vanishing point 2 is going to go right here. And then we're going to add 2 more vanishing points. So this is going to be a little bit tight, and the vanishing point 3 and 4 are going to be kind of close. So this is not a really long diamond, it's more like a square, when we join all those lines. So it'll be a pretty aggressive perspective, but it should give you a really good idea of kind of like what the effect that this creates. And for character, that might actually work quite well. So the process, what we want to do essentially is drawing this grid here in proper perspective, in 4-point perspective. And then after that, we'll go ahead and kind of fill in the boxes, so to speak. So the way we need to do this, if we just kind of translate everything and maintain the same ratio between the boxes, this is not going to work. It'll give us a character that's just kind of like warped. So what I mean is, if we were to take this character right here, and let's say like scale it up like this, and then deform it by trying to make the vanishing points kind of work. So maybe something like this. So let's see, now the vanishing point would kind of work, right? It would follow like a nice curve. So even though now the curves would work, the character, as you can see here, appears like it's being sandwiched in between two really big walls and just getting squashed together. So obviously not working. So what we have to do here is we have to do the same process that we did to find the different distance between the posts when creating like a fence, or finding the distance between windows. Just like we've seen before in the previous chapter on 3-point perspective. So how to do this? Well, we're lucky we have a grid right now. So we have a grid of units. We have essentially 8 units tall that we want to measure. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw 1 unit. So this is going to be one of the units, and we know that these are going to be 2 and 1/3 wide. So if this is 1 right here, what we will want to do is have this duplicated, rotated, and then add 1 to that, just like that, and then add 1/3 more, like this, and then this would be the width of the initial unit that we're trying to work with. All right, so now we have the width of the first unit. So I can extend this, and we can close it off as if this is the first square, the first shape that we want to repeat. And well, we already have kind of like the midsection, so you can imagine, you know, if you would just invert this, those here would be kind of like the posts of the fence that we're working with, and we're trying to find where the other posts land as they get closer and closer to the vanishing points. So what we're going to do is trace, well, first we'll want to trace kind of the vanishing points, the guide, the convergent lines for those. So we'll do a green, a separate layer. And so we know that this line here, this curve, will have to go through this point right there. So now we have kind of like 3 points to make a curve. So we'll try our best to make a nice curve. Actually, if it's a little bit too hard, you can just do kind of like a quarter and duplicate the curve over. So I'm struggling a little bit with this. Okay, so that looks about right. And now I'm gonna duplicate that and flip it vertically like this, so that the bottom here lands on V3. All right, and then I can duplicate the whole thing now, duplicate it horizontally. Okay, and now I have my guides, and so my grid should fit within this. And so I know that right now, you know, this is not correct here. This line here is already going to be a little bit thinner, so this way. Not thinner, but shorter. So there we go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to trace lines, and I'm going to use the guidelines again for this. And we remember we start from one corner, we pass through the center, and we reach the outside line. There we go. So that would be the other line right here. So it would start right there. And now we do the same thing here. Start from here until it touches. There we go. So we have 1, 2, now we have 3 units. We know that we need 4 above the horizon line to match the 4 heads that we have here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to do the same process again. Start here, go through the center, land on the side right there. So this would be the height of the character, right about there. So there we go. And I can do the same thing below. Actually, I'm just going to erase this part, the lower part. I'm going to duplicate what I have up there. Duplicate it vertically after I copy it, of course. All right, and now I can actually recreate my grid. So I have everything that I need now. To be able to recreate my grid in proper perspective, proper 4-point perspective. So this is already a good start. Now all that's left is to actually draw what goes inside of that grid. So now the fun begins. So I'm going to finish the grid. And we'll take a look at what we have there. So now I can, oh well. Delete that, we don't need that part. Don't need that part either. So now I have my grid. So this is the correct size for the grid. And you'll see here by just looking at the two, looking at this one right there and this one here, things are gonna get pretty warped. So just look at the head, right? The head size is going to be this in this image. So it's gonna be tiny compared to the distance between the belly button and the crotch. So before it used to be the same distance. Now it's about this. It's about half, right? So this distance here fits about twice in this here. So we can't measure in the heads anymore. So we have to do it. We have to do a grid like this. Otherwise, things get really, really hard to measure properly. But now we know. So I'm going to go ahead and try drawing this little guy now. So I'm going to do it really, really quickly, just to get kind of like the basic shapes in here. So we know that we start with a circle for the head. And of course, I'm not going to draw him the same way right now, because from this point of view, I'm not looking at him at eye level like he is right now. I'm actually looking at him as if I were shorter. So I'm looking at him from a lower position. So I'll see more of his chin, more of his nostrils, and the angle of the head. The angle of the head essentially is going to be different. And this is pretty tricky to draw if you're not familiar with anatomy, especially. So the anatomy class is going to be very important for this. And of course, again, it just gets easier over time. But drawing limbs in perspective and just body parts in perspective is not the easiest thing. So we can take a look here at all the vertical lines that we have right now. Those are all going to be curved instead. So the arm, from the shoulder to the wrist, it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be a curve instead. So we know that in the second box, the shoulder begins. So right about here. And so we know the different like 1/3 and halves inside of those boxes, you can't just eyeball because it's not going to make that much of a difference. But if you wanted, to split this in half again, then you know how to do it. It's the same process. So I am going to go ahead and place the neck right about here. Not the neck, but the clavicles. And then this is where the shoulders are going to start from. And go touch on the side here. And then they keep going a little bit until they meet the tricep. And then right about here, right above this line is where the bicep would end. And right here is about where it would start. And now I know that the nipples of this guy is going to be right on that line. I know that the belly button is going to be right on here. And his crotch is going to be somewhere around here. So I'm using this as a guide the whole time to make sure that the lines that I draw and the details that I draw are right in the right place. Now that I have a grid to compare it to, it makes things really, really easy. And again, it's one of those things that you'll have to do at the beginning to make sure that you know where things are supposed to be. But once you do it a couple times, you shouldn't be needing this anymore. Somewhere around here. So I'm using this as a guide the whole time to make sure that the lines that I draw and the details that I draw are right in the right place. Now that I have a grid to compare it to, it makes things really, really easy. And again, it's one of those things that you'll have to do at the beginning to make sure that you know where things are supposed to be. But once you do it a couple times, you shouldn't be needing this anymore. right now. So the legs, especially the top of the body, is not as complicated. It is, but not as much as the lower part. So now the legs are gonna have, like, as it gets lower and lower in this grid, I'm seeing the leg from a higher and higher vantage point. So I'll be able to see more of the top of it. So I'm definitely not gonna be able to draw the feet the same way. So in this case, the feet are gonna be, the heels are gonna land right here. Still gonna land right on that line, but I'll be able to see kind of like the top part of the foot, so they'll be able to stick out a little bit like this, since now I'm seeing more of the top of them. Especially the top of the body is not as complicated. It is, but so this is where it gets a little bit tricky, drawing feet from the top view. I'm seeing the leg from a higher and higher vantage point, so I'll be able to see more of the top of it. So I'm definitely not going to be able to draw the feet the same way. So in this case, the feet are going to be, the heels are going to land right here. Still going to land right on that line, but I'll be able to see kind of like the top part of the foot, so they'll be able to stick out a little bit. So I should probably move the knees a little bit in, because right now I drew them a little bit too far apart. I'll just push it in like this. Alright, that should be a little bit closer. So I should probably move the knees a little bit in, because right now I drew them a little bit too far apart. I'll just push it in like this. Alright, that should be a little bit closer. Alright, so proportions wise, that would be kind of it. So it's not perfect, of course, but let me remove the grid and we'll clean this up a little bit. And then I don't feel like drawing this side again, so I'm just gonna mirror it over. There we go, so flip horizontal. Alright, something like that. So erase the other side. Alright, so that would be kind of it. So let me rotate the feet a little bit out, because now they're pointing kind of awkwardly, as if he was holding P or something. So, alright, that's a little bit more like it. So yeah, there we go, as the character seems very deformed. So there's a couple things here that I can adjust. Definitely, I think his torso here needs to be a little bit thinner for this to work better. So I don't want him to look fatter than he actually is. So around the horizon line, there's not going to be much to change. Things are going to be pretty one-to-one in this area right here. So this to this. The big change is going to be as we get closer and closer to the vanishing points. So as we get higher here and lower here in the body, the perspective is going to affect the limbs or the body parts more and more as we get closer. So this is where it needs a little bit more love. So, I can't be drawing the head in the same way. And then right now, the head is not going to be like this. You know, it's not like this. It seems shorter, it seems smaller, but it's actually not. It's not really shorter. It's just it's not really smaller. It's just that it's tilted back much more. So, in this case, what we would see is probably just like his mouth would be all the way up here. That would be kind of like his chin right there. And then you would have the nostrils, tip of the nose, and the eyes. Something like this. And then the eyebrows. As if he's looking up, but it's not. He's not really looking up. It's us that we're looking at him from a lower point. So it would appear that way. So yeah, something like that. You know, imagine the guy is just looking up. So maybe give him a little bit more forehead. All right, like this. And then his feet, we can see like the top of his toes in this case. Something like this. And then the eyebrows. As if he's looking up, but it's not. He's not really looking up. It's us that we're looking at him from a lower point. So it would appear that way. So yeah, something like that. You know, imagine the guy is just looking up. So maybe give him a little bit more forehead. All right, like this. And then his feet, we can see like the top of his toes in this case. All right, so I am going to stop here. The guy's in the good spot right now. Of course, I could polish this a lot more, but I mean, it looks decent now. So you probably noticed that the head's a little bit bigger. I've scaled it up not quite a bit, but just a little bit. So there's one thing that I haven't mentioned yet that you should really know. So this grid, format right here, this works for something that is flat, right? So it works for a building, works for like windows or fence, things that are flat. They're going to be in perspective flat. But we all know that the body is not quite flat. It's not a poster. This would work if it was a poster of a guy that we're trying to place in perspective, but it's an actual real person. So our point of view is going to change a little bit, and we can certainly use this grid as kind of like a base, just to get started. But in reality, we're not really working with a face, just a plane like this. We're actually working with something that's closer to a cylinder. And this is where V1 and V2 come in. So right now, I've drawn it like really, really quickly here on the sides, but this would actually be a little bit more close to what we should actually be using for this. So as you can see here, the head, even though it would barely fit, in this small area, as you've seen before, it was really, really small. But when you warp it and when you consider the body suddenly as a cylinder, like a big cylinder instead of just a plane, like a poster, then suddenly, this sticks out a little bit like that, and I'm able to make the head a little bit bigger, and then it looks nicer. So this is an important step that you'll probably want to do, once you get used to this stuff here. So drawing this grid in perspective is really, really important. It's good that you master this, but when drawing people, this can work, right? So if you adjust it afterwards, it gives you at least the right proportions for the most part, but there's always an extra element, the third dimension, that we have to worry about when drawing bodies, because it's a lot of volumes. It's not flat, definitely not. The way to do this basically is we have to use the vanishing point. So I'm going to redo it really, really quickly to show kind of like the process that I did for this. So as we remember, we're trying to find extra points to be able to draw the circle for this. So in here, of course, I only have the half circle that's visible, but we can imagine that this circle here goes all the way in the back of the cylinder to wrap around, just like this, that, like that. And it becomes more and more circular as you go closer and closer to the vanishing point. And as it gets closer to the horizon, on the other hand, it's going to get flatter and flatter until it becomes just a flat line, as if we're looking at a circle from the side completely. So now to be able to draw those circles, so we're going to consider that this line right here, this horizontal, this vertical line is in the center, is the center of the cylinder. So let's say we have a cylinder like this, or like this, an ellipse, another ellipse, the side of it. This line right here is going to be the line that goes in the center like this of the cylinder. Okay, so to be able to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to use convergent lines to be able to find kind of the outer edges of the circle or the cylinder. So to do this, what I'm going to do is start from V1, and instead of going straight to the first corner here, or the intersection, I'm going to cross at a halfway point in between the two, right here. So a halfway point, cross, and then project it onto the vertical line and see where it lands. So it lands about right there, and I'm going to do the exact same thing with the other vanishing point. And I'm going to do the same for all of them. So cross at the middle of the line, keep going until you reach the center line, and do the same thing on the other side. Again, center, lands about right there. Do the same on the other side. And then for this one here, it's going to go a little bit higher, so it's going to go outside of the boundaries of the grid that we have, and that's fine. There you go. So now we would have the information that we need to be able to draw our circle. Well, not quite actually. So I'm missing a couple. So right now what we have is kind of just like half faces. And what we want is to have legit square. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect the dot here on the edge that we'll be able to draw the circles on. So this one goes right there. So it's starting to be a little bit busy, but there we go. Okay, so I'm going to change color now so that it reads a little bit better. So now we have a point right here, a point right here, a point right here, a point right here. So that would be kind of like the 4 points that we need to draw an ellipse. Of course, we've seen how to get those extra points around it in the first perspective class. So the same would apply here. We could do exactly the same thing, but since we're not going to actually draw a cylinder, we're just using the cylinder as a guide. It doesn't have to be perfect. The ellipse doesn't have to be flawless for this case. So what we have right now, 4 points, that should be plenty enough to allow us to draw a proper ellipse. So there we have it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of those red lines because they're kind of in the way. I don't need them anymore. All right, so now let's draw those circles. So I'm gonna only draw, well actually, yeah, I'm only going to draw the front of that circle because everything that goes in the back like this, I don't need to draw it, it's in the back. So I'm gonna use the same thing here, this one right there. Goes here, touches corner of the square and then goes back down to meet the other side. Same thing here, like this, touches, goes back on the other side. And the last one is going to be almost like a half circle since it's getting really, really close to the vanishing point at the top. There we go. So that would give us kind of a cylinder like this with this red line here at the center of it. So there you go. Now you can see where I got this from. Now, one thing with this method that I've just shown you to create the cylinder right now that we have is not a perfect cylinder. So if you wanted to get a perfect cylinder, and by perfect I mean when you look at it from the top you see a perfect circle. Right now what we have is something that's more like this, which to me is closer to the actual body because we can have like the head and center and then you have the shoulders. There's enough room, right? The body is not really a cylinder, it's more like a flatter cylinder. So if you wanted to get that instead, perfect cylinder, instead of crossing the line right here in the middle, which will give me a kind of like a cylinder that's kind of in the middle, between a straight line and just a flat line, between a circle and a flat line, kind of like the average. Instead of getting that by cutting it in the center right there, if you wanted a perfect cylinder, the way to do this, it would be to, starting from the V1, instead of cutting the line in the center of it, you cross the intersection here with the side. All right, so it would be like this instead. So let me make that line a little bit bigger so we can see it more clearly. But you would have this line here. I'll draw them all to see so that you can kind of see the difference. So this one here through the corner like that, and then this one here through the corner. So as you can see, the perspective for this one is going to be a lot more aggressive because it'll be rounder. So that's why. So that would be it. Those would be kind of like the lines that we get. And instead, what we had are those blue ones. So what we did is I crossed in the middle here. So instead it lands right about there. Instead it lands right about here. There you go. So everything purple would give us a perfect cylinder, something like this. But what we had was what we had in blue, which will give us something like this. So for a body, that's what I chose because that's what represents the body a lot more, at least I think. But so that's why I had them cross kind of at the halfway point. So with the purple, now you would get a curve like this instead, a much more pronounced curve than the blue one that we get, which is this one here, which feels a lot more flat. So that's the main difference. So something to keep in mind. If you are going to draw a real cylinder for like a building or something, then definitely use the purple lines instead. So have the convergent lines meet at the intersection on the edge of your grid. So as you can see here now, I have a little bit more room for the head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this for the bottom too, the bottom part. So copy that down here. All right, and now we can see that the feet actually, they fit in the cylinder. So we know that this guy is in correct perspective. And as we've seen here, this is kind of like the center of this circle, this big circle here. And the center is right here. And this is where, this is the line where the heel land. And then the feet, they extend further beyond this line right there. And then there you go. So for the head here, what I said is I could do is probably make it a little bit bigger. So where's my, okay, there we go. So I could probably take this guy, extend the head a little bit out, maybe stretch him like that, give him a little bit more room to breathe. And now it feels a lot better already. So now it feels like he's got the head of a normal size and it fits nicely in the cylinder. And then as you can see here, all those lines that we see, those guidelines, those curved lines, this is actually what we'll use to draw the muscle. So, where before I had kind of like a straight line here for the pectoral muscles, now what I have is this curve here, right? Nice curve. And you can see that this curve here that I just drew happens to match the curve of my cylinder, the reference cylinder. Another example of a horizontal line. There's this line right here. As you can see here, the clavicles. From the front, it looks pretty straight, but from this angle here, you'll see the line follows again the reference cylinder, right? So if it were straight, it wouldn't work. If it were straight like this, the perspective would be wrong. So instead we have to curve it like this. So there you go. That was a lot, I'm sure, and we're not talking about buildings anymore, so it definitely makes things a little bit more complicated. So this is pretty advanced stuff to be able to draw a character in perspective like this, in 4-point perspective. But hopefully this was insightful. So hopefully this gives you kind of a good understanding of the process for it. So again, like I said, if you don't want to go with something like this, that's definitely more advanced. You can definitely treat your character like a poster. So have a flat grid like I did, the first version that I did. And that works quite well. And after that, once you've placed kind of everything, you can adjust the sizes, maybe like make the head a little bit bigger if it looks too small and things like that. Drawing a character is definitely more complicated than drawing a building or a prop or something that's flat, that has a flat surface. But this is a perspective type that you will likely use quite a bit when it comes to drawing character. So it's very important that you understand it, that you know how to create it, to recreate something like this and place your characters in 4-point perspective. But yeah, because it just allows for really, really cool drawing. So once you have something like that, well, then you could definitely dress this guy up. Maybe add, give him an armor or something, slap on a little bit of colors, maybe give him a more interesting pose, and that would make a pretty cool portfolio piece. So this is how 4-point perspective is done. We've tackled it on potentially the most difficult subject ever, a character. But I hope you took away a few things from this, and I cannot wait to see your own. But again, if this is too complicated, if working on a character right away is not something that you're comfortable with, you can definitely go with something that's more simple, like a building or just a bunch of blocks, right? To practice, use blocks or bricks or things that are simple, things that are square, and this should help you get the hang of it a lot faster than trying to jump on this right away if you're not comfortable yet. But yeah, this is going to conclude this second exercise for the perspective class, and also going to conclude the perspective class 2 as a whole. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you next time. Again, if this is too complicated, if working on a character right away is not something that you're comfortable with, you can definitely go with something that's more simple, like a building or just a bunch of blocks, right? To practice, use blocks or bricks or things that are simple, things that are square, and this should help you get the hang of it a lot faster than trying to jump on this right away if you're not comfortable yet. But yeah, this is going to conclude this second exercise for the perspective class, and also going to conclude the perspective class 2 as a whole. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you next time.